Welcome back to this series. And in this video, we're going to look at the natural healing cycle. And in particular, what we're going to look at is what is called a healing reaction or a healing response. And understanding and being able to identify when you're in a healing reaction or a healing response is one of the most important things you can do and useful things you can do if you have symptoms. And it can save you many wasted trips to the doctor and also take a lot of fear out of having symptoms. Now, something that I would really like to invite you to do is that if you have symptoms, one of the first questions you must ask yourself is, am I in regen? And you're going to understand by the end of this presentation what I mean by that. Now, in a previous video, we looked at the natural self-healing cycle of the body and how when the body can go into a stress phase after a stress trigger, and then it goes into its natural regeneration healing phase after a regeneration trigger. And what we have to remember is that often symptoms are a sign of self-healing or restoring balance in order to bring the body back to homeostasis, which is what the body is striving for all the time. It needs to maintain balance or homeostasis, and it's doing it all the time without you having to think about it. So your pH balance, for example, is always being calibrated by the body. Every cell is constantly calibrating for homeostasis. And understanding this phenomenon when we have illness is really important. So let's start with some simple examples and then we'll go into some more complex examples. So a simple example, you're busy at work, you have a busy job, and your life is pretty busy during the week. And then you get to the weekend and you stop, and that is a regeneration trigger, and you feel exhausted because the body is immediately trying to catch up and restore homeostasis after having been stressed and busy. So remember, it's the body's job to constantly restore and maintain homeostasis in order to maintain health, in order to literally stay alive. So this is quite normal. If you feel exhausted at the weekend, it is your body saying, I need to rest. You need to give me some time to rest. And what happens for a lot of us? We'll feel tired and then we'll push through. We'll have that natural feeling of tiredness where we just want to close our eyes and have a nap, or we want to go to bed early, and we will ignore the feedback from the body of what it needs, and we will push through, and we will keep ourselves in that stress phase, and we will prevent our body maintaining homeostasis. Another example, you're busy at work or you have a busy life, maybe you're at home looking after children, the family, whatever it is that you're doing, you're busy and you're stressed. And then you go for a massage and you feel absolutely exhausted after. You're lying on the table at the end of the massage, you feel totally relaxed, really tired. Maybe you fell asleep on the table and you just don't feel like doing anything after that treatment. And what you really would like to do is just to get into your car and fall asleep before you drive home, or maybe drive home and fall asleep. But what happens? A lot of people, they ignore that natural tiredness and they go straight back into work, straight back into busyness, straight back into the stress phase, and again, they're over demanding on their body. And at some point, the body will present its bill, because it will always present its bill. And so at some point, maybe they will get sick. So we need to really honor these regeneration phases when they happen. And so if you go for a massage and you feel tired afterwards and you want to have a sleep, have a nap. Which is why I always recommend to clients, and I do it for myself, that if I book a massage, I don't have a busy schedule after that massage. Because what's happened during that massage is that lymph fluid has been moved through the body, and the body moves into a regeneration phase to excrete toxic materials from the body. And it needs energy to be able to do that, and it needs time to be able to do that. And if we feel tired after a massage, it's because the body has gone into this self-healing regeneration phase. It needs to do its job, it wants to do its job, and usually what we do is we ignore what the body is needing and we do what our mind says that we ought to do. I have to be back in the office at work. And ultimately, this is not beneficial for the body. Another example, you go on holiday and within a day or two, you get sick and you spend the rest of the holiday in bed. Well, that was because your body needed that rest time. And as soon as it saw you taking time out and having the opportunity to regenerate, it took that opportunity because it's its duty to take that opportunity. It is the body's duty to you to look after you. And so if you get sick after a busy, stressful few months, then that is your body saying, I need to take you out so that you can rest and regenerate, and then you can get on with your life. So we need to honor sickness. The body is far too intelligent to make mistakes. It has not made a mistake, and it's working for you, not against you. And when we look at illness like this, it gives us a whole new perspective. And what I mean by that is that illness often is not a bad thing. We don't have to look at it as a bad thing or a wrong thing or a mistake. We have a whole fresh perspective on what getting sick means. And really what we can see from this is that sickness is the body's way of making us well. And how many people told you that when you were growing up? Now I'll share an example, and I was going to put some pictures in, but they were pretty horrific pictures, so I didn't. But I want to share a true example of a regeneration phase that I experienced not so long ago. I had a very itchy eye. I don't know if I got something in my eye, but it was itching quite badly, and I rubbed it far too much. And within a few hours, my eye had swollen up and it looked absolutely horrendous. And it swelled up so much, it actually formed a bubble on the surface of my eye, and it was very painful. Now, I knew that the eye was doing its job of healing itself after I had rubbed it too much. And rather than rushing off to the emergency department, I did some self-healing on it and waited for a couple of days, and sure enough, it went through the regeneration phase and went back to normal. Now, if I had not known this information that I'm sharing here, I would have gone to the hospital. I would have gone to the doctor. I don't know what they would have done. Maybe they would have given me some drops. I'm not sure. But the point is, if we know that our body is in a self-healing regeneration cycle, it takes a lot of the fear, or even all of the fear, away of having symptoms. Now, obviously, it takes skill and ability and training to be able to know, am I in the regeneration phase or not? And so it's really important that you always do seek appropriate medical attention if necessary. But I'm just trying to illustrate here how it is that often we can have symptoms and our body is actually just doing its job of healing itself. Now, I'm going to share some more complex examples, and before I do, I want to remind you of this quote. All truth passes through three phases. First, it is ridiculed. Secondly, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. And if you find yourself either ridiculing or violently opposing what I'm about to share, just remember this quote. Now, for example, a few hundred years ago, when people thought the world was flat, and Copernicus came along and said, no, it's round, and actually the Earth is moving around the sun isn't moving around the Earth, he was put in prison because what he said was ridiculed, and then it was violently opposed, and then it became self-evident. So just bear this in mind as you hear some of what I'm about to share. Now let's take an example of some symptoms on the skin. And this is the epidermis of the skin. And say, for example, you have rough, dry, flaky skin. This happens in what is called the stress phase. And then what happens in the regeneration phase is we can experience inflammation, swelling, eczema, chickenpox, hives, shingles, rubella. Now, how many people would think that their body was actually in a self-healing phase when it is exhibiting things like eczema or chickenpox or shingles? Unless we understand this stuff and we're trained to understand this stuff, we would not know that. I certainly didn't know that. I had shingles when I was about 14 years old. I had no idea that my body was actually trying to heal itself. Now, one of the reasons that symptoms don't clear is that sometimes we get stuck in the regeneration phase. In other words, the body is finding it difficult to complete the self-healing cycle. It's like the stress phase has happened and then a regeneration trigger has happened. We're now in the regeneration self-healing phase, but we don't get to the other end, back out the other side into health. Now, the reason for that will be because the emotional conflict theme that is associated with these symptoms has not been completed. Now, in this case, the emotional conflict theme for this type of symptom is loss of touch. It's some sort of issue around either I don't want to be touched or I want more touch, some sort of touch issue. So we'll look at another example with the skin. In the stress phase, we can experience blackheads. And then in the regeneration phase, we can experience pimples or acne or inflammation. Now again, a lot of people will not realize or think that pimples and acne and inflammation are the body actually trying to heal itself. And the reason those pimples and acne is not going away and is not self-clearing is because we're not clearing the underlying emotional conflict theme. And the underlying emotional conflict theme for these types of symptoms is some sort of protection or defilement. So what that means is that somehow we don't feel emotionally safe or protected, and our body is creating these symptoms in response to what is going on at an emotional level. Now, there are also other types of healing responses. For example, we can have emotional symptoms rather than physical symptoms. So, for example, we may have had an original trauma, and it could have been even some years before, and we may also have done some healing work to heal this emotional trauma. And once we move into the regeneration phase, we may experience a temporary reoccurrence of the original symptoms. So let me give an example. For me personally, I experienced a lot of depression throughout my life, which related back to a lot of emotions of upset, frustration, anger, sadness, grief, etc., that occurred in my childhood. And I went to a very intense healing workshop. It was a 2-week healing workshop some years ago. And a couple of weeks after the workshop, I woke up one morning and seemingly out of the blue, I felt very, very down. It was like these symptoms of depression had reoccurred for no apparent reason. Now, by day 2, I suddenly thought, oh, this could be a healing response. And remember the question that I put right at the beginning of this session. I said, one of the most important questions to ask yourself when you have symptoms is this regen? Or am I in regen? So I asked myself, could this be a regeneration or healing response? And I decided to hold it as a possibility that it was. And sure enough, within 24 hours, I was feeling right as rain. But for a couple of days, I was quite low and quite depressed. Now, one of the signs of a healing response is that it is temporary and it will pass. If symptoms are going on and on and on, and I'm talking for days and weeks and months and maybe even years, then that is not what we call a temporary healing response. That is symptoms, and it may be that you're either in the regeneration phase and stuck because you're not clearing the emotional issue underneath, or it may be that you're in the stress phase. But when we're in a healing response, healing reaction, then symptoms are usually temporary and they will go quite quickly. So it's really good to be able to identify, is this a regen response? Now we can also have healing reactions and healing responses when we're taking medical treatment. And what we have to remember is that symptoms are often the side effect of medication having its physical effects in the body. If you get any medication, it's always going to come with a piece of paper which will say, X, Y, Z side effects could happen when you take this medication. So I'm going to share a really good example here. Some years ago, I had very low iron, and it was so low I decided that I would have an iron infusion. And it is well known that you can have side effects when you have an iron infusion. So the day after the iron infusion, I woke up and I couldn't even lift my head off my pillow. I felt absolutely nauseous, dizzy, sick, high fever. I felt absolutely, as they say, as sick as a dog. Now, if I had not known that this could have been a side effect and a regeneration phase, I would have called the doctor. But I knew, I could just feel, and I knew the reason I had these symptoms was as a side effect and a consequence of having the iron infusion. And I knew that the symptoms were my body's way of trying to restore homeostasis. Because what we have to remember is that things like nausea and vomiting are the body's way of excreting substances which it regards as toxic from the body. That is the body's natural way of getting rid of these substances. So we'll either have the nausea and the vomiting and it comes out one end, or we'll have the diarrhea and it comes out the other end. This is the digestive system's natural way of getting rid of toxins. So I decided that I was going to ride it through for 24 hours and see how I was. I woke up the next day as if nothing had happened. My body had done what it needed to do. It had restored homeostasis, and all I needed to do was to trust that it was doing what it needed to do. Because, as I said, the body is far too intelligent to make mistakes. Now, I've also said before, and I'll say it again, if you don't understand how to tell whether you're in a healing response, you must seek appropriate medical help. Understanding this phenomenon takes professional training and it takes experience and skill. So it is always important to seek out the appropriate medical attention if you need it. But hopefully, I'm opening your eyes to a new way of seeing things that you may not have thought of before. So remember, symptoms are often a sign of self-healing, i.e., restoring balance, because homeostasis is the name of the game. So how do you know if you're in a regeneration response or having a healing reaction and that your symptoms are a sign of healing? Well, either you go and study and learn about it, or you get professional help to help clarify the situation. In other words, you go and find a practitioner who understands this phenomenon. And as I said, if in doubt, seek medical advice. And finally, as I always say, remember, we heal a person, not a health condition. We heal a person's life, not an illness.